Welcome to Emotions in Harmony, a bilingual podcast about our inner experiences and some insights about what we do better in our relationships with ourselves or others. Dr. Carmen Roman will explore interesting topics in creative, inspiring, and fun ways. With interviews to experts in the field of psychology and some on her own, she will take us in a journey of self-discovery in English or Spanish. And now with you, Dr. Carmen Roman.
Hello, wonderful listeners of Emotions in Harmony. We are here one more time with this episode about traveling. I am so excited and I feel so honored to have Dr. Dana Nelson. Dr. Dana Nelson is also a podcaster, and you already heard all her credentials and license and all of this, but what I want to tell you is that I invite her to talk to us about traveling because I was inspired by one of her episodes in her podcast about the feeling of being foreigner and looking everything through fresh eyes. And personally, I don't think so that we have enough in the field of psychology about traveling, but there is so much that happens to our psyche, to our emotions, and to our personality when traveling. So this is a conversation that we are jumping into this new field of psychology of travel. But I really wanted to have your experience on that. Welcome, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation with you and to have a little podcast exchange.
Yes, it is fun.
Yeah.
So let's talk about traveling and couples who travel and all of this fun stuff.
Yeah. So I think there are some things about traveling that we could talk about that probably are true for individuals who travel. And then maybe some things that are more specific to the experience of people who travel with their partner. And maybe some of that differs whether it's a partner that you're just getting to know still and you're learning about one another versus a longer term partner. So I'm not sure where you feel like would be helpful to jump in, but a lot we can talk about in terms of learning about other cultures, kind of questioning our assumptions about things, but also learning a lot about ourselves and our partners too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am really interested, Dr. Nelson. I will call you Dana.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I am very interested, Dana, in talking about what happened with couples, whether they are new or not new in the relationship. What happened? What is the benefits? Let's put it that way. If there's any benefits of traveling together, or what are the challenges of traveling together?
Yeah, I think that when you're traveling with somebody who is like a new partner, somebody you're still getting to know, I think that there's just a lot you can learn about somebody when you get them out of their comfort zone. So when we're traveling, there's a lot that can be really fun about traveling, but there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of sort of challenges that we have to overcome, or we're just in uncomfortable settings. And we can observe a lot about another person when they're in those situations. And we can kind of figure out how well do we navigate those challenges together, which can teach us a lot about whether or not this is a relationship that we see having a future. So I think that there really is some truth to kind of, traveling with a potential partner or a new partner can teach you a lot about how you would handle the challenges of life together. I think also with longer term couples, though, we can get into sort of a rut or a routine in our relationships. We can think we kind of know everything about our partner because we've lived with them for however many years. And I think that traveling can sometimes help us see our partners with fresh eyes, which can kind of help us remain curious about one another, it helps us continue to feel attracted to one another. We can also sort of continue to grow together by facing challenges together, by recognizing like we're a team and we can face this adventure, this challenge together. So I think it can take different forms at different stages in relationships, but it has the potential to teach us a lot about one another and also to then grow together as we face some of those challenges. There can also be challenges that show us like we're not handling things really well together. And then we either need to learn to communicate better about those things, or we might recognize like, wow, this new boyfriend, girlfriend that we've been dating for 6 months, we travel with them and we realize, I don't think this relationship has much future because they melt down under stress. And I don't think that's something that I want in my life, So it can teach us important things like that as well.
Yeah, that's right. So what are the emotional skills that we need to travel with a partner?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there are a number of emotional skills that can be really helpful. And again, this is somewhat true in travel without a partner as well.
Yeah, that's right.
But some of these may be more important with another person. So I think that some of the things that are important, maybe whether or not we're traveling with a partner, when we're in a new environment, exploring a new culture, out of our comfort zones, include being open to new experiences. So kind of being curious and viewing our experiences as a learning experience, as an adventure, not going in sort of assuming that we know what's going to happen or that there's one right way to do things. Or for instance, you might go to another country and discover that there are different customs for how just everyday things are handled, like how people greet one another or what is perceived to be polite behavior. And if we go into that with curiosity and interest, then I think we have a much more positive experience. Whereas if we go in sort of thinking like, well, why do people do this way? That's not the right way to handle this, or that behavior is impolite, but that's only from my cultural lens. Maybe from another cultural lens, it's different. If we go in with that perspective, we're more likely to both feel negative emotions like frustration, but also we don't benefit from the opportunity to expand our perspective. So I think being open to new experiences, sort of questioning our assumptions, that's a good emotional or cognitive skill. I don't know if it falls into that category, but I think it's a good attitude to have as we travel. And certainly when we do that with our partners, we also then get to sort of have really interesting conversations about like, isn't this interesting that we come from this cultural lens and look what we're learning about this other culture and how does that put into perspective, our own backgrounds. And then we learn about one another. Maybe we learn that our partner's having slightly different reactions to things. And that's an interesting way to grow together, to have those conversations. Well, so another thing that can be really important when we're traveling, either by ourselves or with our partners, but maybe especially with other people, like our partners, is our ability to sort of tolerate frustration or tolerate things not going according to plan. So like, for instance, let's say we have a plan to go from one city to another, and we have trouble figuring out how to get on the right bus because we can't read the street signs because they're all in another language. And so we didn't anticipate this challenge and we miss our bus. And all of our plans have to change. We can see that as a failure. We can get really frustrated with ourselves or with our partners if maybe we blame them for that. Or we can view that as like, here's the new adventure in front of us, trying to figure out now how to get there. So like being able to tolerate things, changes and adapt and not kind of have a rigid idea of how things have to go. I think that can be really helpful, both in terms of just enjoying the trip, but also then in terms of the interpersonal component of like, people are going to respond differently to frustration. And if we can kind of have an adventure in that, I think it's helpful in terms of how the couple handles things together. Other kinds of emotional skills that I think are really important when we're traveling with a partner is having some awareness of our own, like emotional awareness of ourselves. So for instance, like being aware of when we're tired or being aware of when we're feeling sort of cranky or when we've just had too much, to be able to actually like recognize that and then communicate that to our partner. So to be able to say, I'm noticing that I'm just feeling really tired and it's been a really long day and I'm sorry that I was short with you or I snapped at you, but it's because I think I'm just really tired. To be able to have that conversation rather than letting little things escalate into arguments. Because when we're spending all day with a person in a foreign country or a foreign city, little things can very easily escalate into an argument. So to be able to kind of have that awareness. I'm thinking, for instance, recently, my partner and I were traveling together and we got into this weird pattern where we were not eating lunch until late in the afternoon. And I am more sensitive to not eating lunch than he is. And so I was finding like it would get to be 2 or 3 and we would be like, suddenly we're like, oh, we really need to eat lunch. But we're searching for a restaurant and it was hard to figure out where to go. And in that state of mind, I would start to get really, really irritable. And then it was hard and then he would ask me to want to choose the restaurant. I was like, I can't choose the restaurant. I'm so irritable. And so we were able to have conversations. I know, I'm like, I want to eat, but like, everything's going to start closing. So, I was getting hangry, this phrase, where you haven't eaten enough and you start to get irritable. So to have the emotional awareness that like, okay, if I keep waiting until 2 or 3 in the afternoon to eat lunch, I am not at my best. Let's try to prevent that situation from happening so that I don't start to get irritable and snap at you. And then we could have a conversation about that and rearrange things to make sure we're eating lunch or a little earlier in the day. But if we don't talk about that stuff, those things can quickly escalate into something where we're really upset with one another. So I think that requires both emotional awareness, like me recognizing, oh yeah, I'm starting to feel irritable, and then also some communication skills, talking about that together.
Something that one of my family members, when my husband and I, we were preparing our wedding, somebody said, it's going to be a lot of decisions, and some of them seem important. It's just a wedding, but some of them seem so important. So she said, what about if you just ask each other, do you hate it? Maybe you don't like it, but do you hate it? And now that you are talking about this communication traveling, I will bring that too. It's like, maybe there are some times that you will not like a new adventure or new restaurant or new anything, but maybe you can compromise. So have the ability to prevent and talk in advance about that, and like, will you hate if we go to that restaurant or all that?
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know if this is quite what you're getting at, but I think so. Maybe that sometimes recognizing that something may be very important to one person, and the other person, you have to make sure the other person doesn't hate something, but it may just be less important to that person. And that may involve, in the context of travel, that could involve going to see one particular thing in this location may be really important to me. I may can't imagine going to this place without seeing this particular site or this particular museum or whatever. Whereas my partner might be like, it's okay, we can do that, but I could take it or leave it. This other thing is more important. And then so how do we compromise to make sure that we're taking into account what each of us wants to do, getting both of our needs met, doing some things that we don't hate, but we're less thrilled about because we know it's important to our partner as well. And if we don't talk about those things, we don't know. And then we can't sort of figure out a way to fit it all into our trip.
So having the ability to negotiate.
Yes, negotiating is very important in relationships in general, but absolutely when we're traveling together. Yeah.
Life could be a travel. Yeah.
It is. And I think, there's all these, metaphors for both life and relationships that involve sort of talking about them as a journey. And I think that is really true that, if we approach our lives and our relationships as a journey, and as an adventure, and we remain curious and recognize that we have a lot to learn from one another. It makes me think, I don't know if you've seen the movie Up.
No.
Did you see this movie?
No.
It's an animated movie. It's so cute. Well, I highly recommend it. So I won't give away anything about it, but it sort of gets at this idea of like a couple who really love going on adventures together. They love to travel, and sort of recognizing that one of their greatest life adventures is actually their relationship. So it's such a sweet movie, but it kind of gets at that idea.
Yeah. What are the abilities that we need to the best use when we travel?
So there's some practical abilities, and then there's also some sort of more abilities maybe related to our emotions and our interpersonal stuff. I mean, I think some of the practical things are organization and planning and probably finding some balance between planning and then adapting as circumstances change. So not sticking rigidly to your plan, but doing some research ahead of time so that you're prepared for the situation. It depends on, whether you're traveling to a place that's kind of more similar to where you're from, or whether you're going to a place that, where you don't speak the language and you may not necessarily be able to count on things being as you would expect. You may need to do some research ahead of time to be prepared for that. So I think, organization, but then also being flexible, that's an important ability. I think that also, as we've talked about, communication. So if we're traveling with a partner, to be able to communicate about our expectations, making some plans about what are the things that we want to make sure that we make time for and that we do together. And then what are the things that maybe we'll see once we're there. We'll see whether we have time. We'll find out maybe there's stuff that we don't even know about that's going to be cool that we'll want to do while we're there. But wanting to sort of make sure that we know, what are my priorities? What are your priorities? How do we make sure we balance those things? So again, negotiation skills. I think that also communication about like how you're going to handle your budget and things like that is important ahead of time when you're traveling. In terms of sort of like the sort of attitudes or emotional kind of abilities, I think that sort of thinking about some of the things we've already talked about, but also sort of trying to look at things through the lens of having an adventure, so that when you face challenges, that you see them as sort of like an adventure to overcome together rather than a setback. I think that that is a helpful ability to kind of put things in that perspective. I think also having some ability to take the perspective that that there are different cultural lenses is important too, recognizing that experiences that you have, if you have an emotional reaction to the way that people are behaving in another place, that there may be another way to interpret that behavior. For instance, I can think about a trip that I took quite a long time ago with my family where we were in China. And while I was there, when we were in some rural areas, I think that there were people that we encountered who had never seen a Western person. And so they were like staring at us. And there was a part of me that was aware that staring in China, because we had learned about this, it's not perceived to be impolite in the way that in the United States we're taught not to stare at people, that it's sort of seen as aggressive, or like, especially when you're right next to somebody, if you stare at them from a very close range, like I experienced that as sort of an intrusion on my personal space. But that's not necessarily the way that it's interpreted in every country. And I remember taking this flight within the country from one part of China to another. And the man sitting next to me on the plane, it felt like it. I may be exaggerating now, but it felt like he literally was staring at me the entire flight. And at some point, I could sort of say, okay, isn't this an interesting cultural experience? And on the other hand, I was getting really emotionally worked up about it. I was like, I can't stand this. Like, this guy is sitting right next to me and staring at me and I'm getting all emotional. So to be able to kind of have that perspective that like, okay, isn't this interesting how I am reacting? And yet I recognize that I don't think that this person has any awareness that would be how I interpret it. And so like, isn't that a fascinating cultural experience? So to have that perspective, I think allows us to get less emotionally reactive to things like that when we're in other cultures. I think one other skill or ability that is incredibly important in life in general, but in travel also, is having a sense of humor. So to be able to laugh at our mistakes. And so, like maybe we try to speak another language and we like say something horribly and no one understands us. And like to be able to laugh at that rather than being hard on ourselves, or to laugh at the fact that we, have trouble navigating this foreign transportation system or whatever, rather than sort of taking that as a reason to be either critical with ourselves or with our partners. And when our partners are, because I think travel brings up a lot of heightened emotion. So we're excited, we're happy, we're having an adventure. And then there are also going to be moments where things are more challenging. And so when one of us is kind of struggling, feeling like upset by something or having a difficult time having that perspective, to use humor we have to be careful with humor because we don't want to like make fun of people or have humor at another person's expense. When
that person is not having fun, yeah.
Right. No, absolutely not. But like have humor to kind of loosen things up and help the person sort of shift their perspective, I think can be really helpful skill to have. So those are some ideas.
Yes. It's really fascinating. As I told you before the interview, I really love the way you organize your thoughts and you convey your thoughts, because we travel sometimes and we don't realize how important it is for our emotional experience or for the relationship. And as we don't realize that and we don't, let's say, are aware of that, we actually can judge the partner or the person by the same way that we will judge at home. I don't know if I make sense with my comments. Like in my home, my partner takes care of me and asks me what I want. And we were traveling and he didn't ask. It's because he's also having that experience of being foreigner or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sort of shakes up the dynamic where you might not be, your partner might not be responding in quite the ways you're used to. And then we can have reactions to that.
Yeah. We get to know new parts of the personality of the person who we travel with.
It's interesting you say that. This is a little bit unrelated, but it makes me think of also, like, I think that we can get into dynamics in relationships sometimes where there's one person who may be like more confident in navigating certain things, and the other person may rely on that person to do that. Like I'm thinking, for instance, this may be sort of an unusual circumstance because I live in France with my French partner. So we're here and I can navigate daily life, but French is not my native language. It is his. So sometimes I sort of rely on him to speak to people in certain situations where it's a little complicated. I'll sort of say, oh, why don't you kind of communicate for us? And when we travel together in a place where neither of us speak the language, I notice in myself the tendency to sort of still be like, oh yeah, I'll let him kind of be the one to try to communicate with people. But then like I see him struggling too. And that's actually really interesting because then it's like suddenly we're kind of on even playing field and we're both struggling. And I think that can be uncomfortable, but it can also be really nice. It can be like, this may sound strange, but it's like I see him as slightly vulnerable in that situation. And there's a way in which that is endearing to me. It also it forces me to step up and push myself out of my comfort zone a little bit more. It means that we're like both kind of fumbling around and we can laugh about it together. So I don't know, it's sort of like a fresh perspective on our partner in that way.
Or it's like when I moved to the United States and I didn't speak the language, I used to pick up a lot of nonverbal communication. Also because I'm a psychologist, yeah?
Sure, yeah.
But that helps. But I used to pick a lot of this nonverbal communication, and sometimes I will make up my own stories based on that, yeah?
Yeah.
And I have that experience in me. I know that feeling of vulnerability based on the lack of the language. So when my husband and I traveled to Mexico, he doesn't speak Spanish. And he picked up a lot of stories that are true. It's just different. Different stories. So people are talking fast Spanish, or I am negotiating with somebody because we are doing something or something. And then he brings this piece of information that, oh, this person moved that way, or that person didn't, or something. And that complements the experience. But when we don't pay attention to those little things, we may get in trouble with a partner because like, you don't help me, or you don't.
Well, and then it all comes back again to communication. I mean, like we could be a broken record about this,
yes,
but it's really true. Like, I think that one of the things that makes many of these challenges either become problems or opportunities for growth is how well we communicate about them with each other. So do we sort of talk to our partner about, like, this is really interesting that we're finding ourselves in this different experience, and here's how I notice myself responding? Or do we just kind of react emotionally without really having a conversation about it? But I think that is really important. Like, it kind of teaches us new things, both about our partners and about ourselves, to be in these new situations. I will take a look of my questions, because I know we are getting into your time, and you, for France, I know you must be ready for dinner. It's getting late.
And in California, we just have breakfast.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add about the impact in the relationship? Are we missing something?
I think we sort of touched on some of this at the beginning when we were talking about like newer relationships versus more developed relationships, kind of like learning about one another. But I guess one thing that I just want to emphasize is that I think that relationships and travel can also be ways that we learn about ourselves. They sort of, like, we see aspects of ourselves reflected back through our partner's reactions to us. We learn about ourselves as we travel because we sort of have to sort of acknowledge our assumptions and question them and recognize, like, if other people may do things differently or see things differently, why do I look at it this way? What is my cultural lens? So I think that there is like an aspect of our own personal self-awareness that we can develop both in travel and in relationships. And I guess one of the coolest things about traveling with a partner is that it could spark interesting conversations where we deepen our connection because we're having cool conversations about that stuff. So I think, I guess that would just be one thing that I think travel can impact relationships in really positive ways if we sort of use it as opportunities to grow together. And then also, I think, another way it can impact relationships in a really positive way is that when we have shared experiences of overcoming challenges together, we feel closer.
Yes.
And so that's like a really wonderful way that travel can positively impact relationships.
Or you have just the two of you, those kind of memories.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It is a kind of a complicity.
Yeah.
Or something that is just our experience, is nobody else. Yeah.
Yeah, your shared experience, your shared memory together. Absolutely. And one thing that like my partner and I love to do after we go on trips together is then we go through all of our photos and we make a little photo album of our trip together. And it's sort of just even the process of going through our photos is kind of fun. We remember doing that. And then we have a book from it that we can kind of look back at. We can share with other people if we want to, but it's also like our adventure together.
Yes.
That's kind of fun.
I have a couple, they are our friends. And every year they travel 3 weeks to somewhere else. Sometimes they travel some place that they don't know at all, yeah? So when they come back, I always want them to show their 1,000 pictures and tell the stories and whatever. And it's very interesting that he tells the story and then she say, no, it wasn't that way. And then they go back and forth with their stories. And I just love how they are alive, how they, as a couple, they come with deepening their experience and whatever. So that was my inspiration for this topic because
interesting, yeah.
That they not only grow their relationship, but also, I don't know, I am happy seeing them happy.
Yeah. It sounds like then they also bring that energy from that experience back into their other relationships.
Yes.
Outside of their partnership, like with their friends like you and other people, which is really cool.
Yes. And other people. And they come with candies or some little things that represent us
to share.
And for me, it's very important to make them talk when they are children around because children will get adjusted to that experience, yeah? So it is important to realize how traveling may benefit also a relationship and the community.
Absolutely, I agree.
I work with couples and I work with families, and when I see couples or in travel, I usually ask them to travel. I usually, at least for a weekend or something that they get out of their comfort zone.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that is a really important point that like I've been talking about travel primarily, like I've been sort of saying things like being in a foreign country, but I don't think that what we're talking about here requires going really far away. It could mean going away for the weekend to somewhere that you can drive to, or you can take a bus to, or whatever. But somewhere where you don't know your way around and you've got to figure it out together and have a little mini adventure together and you're outside of your comfort zone. That's like being outside of our comfort zone is where we learn.
Yes, that's right. And I don't have a research, I don't have statistics or anything, but what I notice is in the families that I work with or in the couples that I work with is when they don't travel and they start having these getaway weekends or sort of traveling, whatever, their sexual relationship also improves because it brings this novelty into their...
Yeah. I think that there could be multiple reasons why that happens. You know, for one thing, when you're traveling, it's easier to sort of leave behind some of the stress or of your daily routine. And sometimes those things can get in the way of your sexual connection. But then I think it's also true that just like being in a new environment, having that novelty, it can kind of put you more into that mindset. And then this kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you've read Esther Perel's book, Mating in Captivity, which is an excellent book.
Yes.
But she talks a lot about the importance of remaining curious about your partner and seeing your partner almost like as a stranger from time to time, like not in a way where you don't know them, but where you suddenly like look at them through the eyes of a different person and you see like, there are things about this person that I still don't know. And that's exciting. And like, I want to keep getting to know them rather than like, oh yeah, I know everything about that person already. And I think when we travel, it allows us to see our partners in that way, in a way that is attractive and is more likely to like inspire that sexual connection more too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of my curiosity for this topic. I have a couple more other questions, like do you recommend or do you have any idea about secret words, secret ideas when traveling for safety? I'm talking about safety now.
Because you had shared this question with me ahead of time, so I was thinking a little bit about it. You know, I don't know necessarily that, like, I think that if couples find it helpful to have specific words that they use, that's a great idea. But I think that different couples may have different strategies for how they handle things related to safety. It probably depends on where they're traveling to. But one thing that really points at that I think is, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's like communication about safety. Because I think one thing that can be interesting is in some situations, one partner may think, like safety concerns are not even on their radar. They don't feel concerned about it. Whereas the other person may feel less safe and they need to then communicate, like, how are we going to handle this together and respect the needs of both people in that situation? So like, for instance, there have been some situations with myself and my own partner where, and my partner is a man and I'm a woman. And I think that there are some situations where as a man, it's not been on his radar because I think the safety concerns are somewhat different for men and women in certain situations. And whereas like, I have felt like there are some situations that I don't want to put myself into, especially not when I'm by myself. Like I feel more comfortable if we're doing it together. But like as a woman, if I were traveling alone, I wouldn't want to go into certain situations. And we've had to talk about that because he's very understanding about it, but it just hasn't occurred to him until we talk about it. And there may be other factors that influence one partner being, having those things on their mind more. They may have had experiences of, trauma that might impact their, like how easily triggered they are around safety concerns, or, people coming from different cultural or ethnic backgrounds may feel more or less safe in certain other countries. So being able to talk about those things and then being respectful when like, I don't feel unsafe in this situation, but I have to respect the fact that my partner does. And therefore we have to work together to not, put ourselves in situations where we feel unsafe, or to communicate about it. And if they're feeling uncomfortable, then we do what we need to do to leave, or, those sorts of things. So that could include having special words that like code words that, okay, this means we need to now get out of the situation, or I need you not to leave me alone, or whatever. But it may take different forms for different couples.
Yeah. That's a good communication and strategy and plan in advance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Planning in advance. Exactly. Yeah.
Is there any source or books or anything that you recommend for people or couples who travel?
I think I was trying to give some thought to this because I feel like there are just a lot of amazing travel resources out there. They're not necessarily focused on couples. Mm-hmm. There are also some wonderful resources out there for couples who are wanting to deepen their relationship or their communication.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's not necessarily focused on travel. I think that there are a number of other podcasts that are out there that are sort of either interviewing people about their travel experiences or talking about tips for travel, some of which are focused on couples who travel together. I think there's this growing trend of couples who either figure out ways to work remotely and they just like travel the world and work remotely. And there's some podcasts focused on that. Or there's like people who decide to quit their job for a year and, go live out of an RV. And so I think that there are some different podcasts like that could be interesting. I don't have the names of any of them on the tip of my tongue, but I'm happy to follow up with you and let you know so that you could include a couple of those. A more general resource, though, that I think is really helpful when it comes to planning travel would be the website TripAdvisor. I think it's a fantastic website. And then another resource that's like more just focused on couple stuff that I really love is a book by Sue Johnson called Hold Me Tight. And it's a really lovely book. I actually have it right over here. So I was looking at it as I had lent it to someone recently. And I think it's a really great book for couples to read together and to talk about their communication skills and to talk about their safety needs and to talk about like, how do we negotiate things together? So that could apply to travel, but it could also apply to other areas of life.
I realize I'm putting you in a very specific topic. Yeah.
But it's an interesting one.
It's a very specific. Yeah. It's a very interesting one. But the reason I was thinking for this topic is because you have been exploring what does it mean to be living abroad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is the experience of being foreigner in another country? What is the experience of living, not traveling, but more permanent?
Yeah. Which is a little bit different. It has some things in common with travel, but it is true that like when we're traveling for vacation, we're thinking, oh, I'm here having an adventure. I think when we're trying to build a life in another country, it can be that way at first. And then we realize we have to sign our kids up for school and try to find a job. And that's a totally different experience in a foreign country. So yeah.
Pay the rent. Yeah, now you need to be worried about normal things. Yeah.
And it might be kind of interesting that you're a foreigner when you're traveling. But like day after day, if that's your life, it can wear on you in different ways. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for playing along with this topic.
Of course. It's a fun topic and yes. Definitely, an interesting one that's worth exploring. So I appreciate you inviting me to have the conversation.
Dana, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have so many conversations with my clients about what is grown, what is the difficult emotions, the challenges, etc. That the psychology has also its fun part.
Mm-hmm, it does. Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is why I wanted to have fun with this topic.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, we have creativity, we have travel, we have so many other things that psychology can be applied to.
Yes, absolutely. Every area of life, maybe, I think.
Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Okay. Yeah, so I have a podcast called Mindful Expat, and it focuses on issues related to emotional well-being and resilience and just how we sort of take care of ourselves emotionally and personally for people. It's geared specifically for people who are living abroad. So some of the things that we talk about there probably would be relevant to people who are not living abroad, but that is a population that, I, as somebody currently living abroad myself, and I'm a therapist who works with English speakers in France. So by definition, most of my patients or clients are people living abroad. So I wanted to do something specifically geared toward the needs of that population. So that's what my podcast is all about. And as we mentioned before, you were on my podcast recently, and we were talking about how important creativity can be for people who are navigating that experience of living in a foreign country. So that's just like a taste of some of the things that we talk about. But if people are interested in checking it out, they can come over to the website. It's just www.mindfulexpat.com, and they can, listen to episodes there and check it out. Yeah.
Yes. I highly suggest your podcast. I enjoy it.
Thank you.
You probably want to keep focusing on Mindful Expat, but I just find delightful to listen every aspect that you talk, in every different topic that you talk. So I like it. I enjoy it. And even if people is not traveling abroad, even if they are not living abroad, that's perfect.
Before we spoke today, you had asked me if there were any particular episodes that I might want to point people to. In addition to our conversation, there was a conversation that might be relevant to people who are interested in the topic that we discussed today. I had a conversation on my podcast with a woman named Oksana Holtman. And she is a couple, she does coaching with couples, specifically expat couples who are navigating the experience of moving abroad together as a couple. And so we had a conversation about how the experience of living in a foreign country can actually deepen and enrich relationships. So if people are interested in learning more about that topic, that is something that they could check out. I think if they go over to my website, I think it's episode 13. So that's just maybe on a related but slightly different kind of topic.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to say? You want to say about your private practice?
I mean, sure. Yeah. So I live and I work in Lyon, France, and I have a private psychotherapy practice here, and I work with English speaking people, not only native English speaking people, because there are a fair number of people who live in Lyon who are from other countries and they happen to feel more comfortable speaking English than French. But I work with people here in person, and I also do some work with people remotely, because there are people who live elsewhere in France or in other parts of Europe where they don't have access to English-speaking therapists. So if anyone is interested in checking that out, you can actually find my psychotherapy practice website is connected to the podcast website. So it's all, if you go there, you could find everything about it there too.
Okay. Yeah. Well, really a pleasure talking to you as always.
Thank you. The pleasure is truly mine. I really appreciate the invitation. This has been fun.
Thank you. And thank you to the listeners who are in this episode. And please share with us, either with Dr. Nelson or with me, what you think about this topic. Do you want to be covering similar topics? We are always open to suggestions.
Yeah, that would be fun to hear from people about their own experiences of traveling and how it may have impacted their relationships too.
Yes, we have. You also have in your website some place that they can leave a record, audio, an audio.
Yes, there is.
Yes, some service like that. So you can go to her website or my website and leave some audio recording.
Oh, that would be fun.
That will be fun. And if you want us to put it in and is related to any topic in the podcast, we can put it in the podcast. Just communicate with us. We are open for more fun ideas about how to use our knowledge of psychology.
Absolutely.
Yes. And the not fun too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Dana, for being with us today. And I guess hopefully one day we will be visiting each other in the podcast again.
That would be wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye for now.
We have ended one more episode of Emotions in Harmony. See you the next one, when Dr. Carmen Roman will help us to have a more fulfilled life caring for ourselves and the ones we care for. Meanwhile, visit www.emotionsinharmony.com to see the show notes, subscribe, and enjoy more content.